Um, and today I wanted to have a conversation, like keep it really kind of dialogical and flowing and have everyone kind of, you know, just be like an intimate conversation, which is kind of cool that with the amount of people that are here, it should work really well. Um, and I want to cover four topics. So like number one is like what do we mean when we say like shaman, or Alexander Bard uses the word shamanoid. Is that, like a type? There's a theory like laymen and people like Alexander Bard, they have this theory that there's like a type of person that's kind of like an outcast, or maybe like 4 to 8% of the population have these certain predispositions and capacities. And so what do we think about that theory, and what would that type look like if there was such a thing? And then the second question is, why might they be relevant to or needed for this particular moment in our history as a species on the planet? What purpose could they be serving, maybe on the more planetary scale? And then the third is like, okay, what are the actual capacities that we're going to talk about and develop over the 9 weeks? Like when we say like igniting shamanic capacities, what are shamanic capacities? What does that look like? What does that mean? And then finally, I'd like to get into a discussion of, okay, if we take it to be true that some people have these capacities and that they could develop them, what are some practices? What are practices that we as a community could engage in, almost like scientific experiments over the next 9 weeks, to explore the potential to develop these capacities within ourselves? So I said a few things there. So I'd like to open up the floor and see what everyone, if anyone has a first response, or how that's landing for you, or how you're making sense of everything so far. Melody, hello, Melody.
Hello, my friend. Hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces. So nice to see you. And Justin, thanks as always for bringing us all together with these incredibly relevant topics, at least they are to me. And so, shaman, just the word itself resonates with me. And I'm just eager to learn more about it because I don't. I have an idea what I think a shaman is, but so I'm open to learn.
Okay, cool. What's your idea? Do you want to say anything about that? Put it out
Well, I
there.
think I don't know if they've got some sort of channeling or mystical powers, or I have an idea of them that they are here to serve, here to heal,
Hmm,
and really help mankind.
hmm, cool. Thank you. Thanks for being first, too. Appreciate it. Anyone else want to share, or I don't know, throw something into the mix at this point? Go. Oh,
I'll throw
oh,
some in.
okay, cool.
I mean, I'll just throw into the mix that I've always thought of shamans as people who have access to realms beyond our everyday ordinary consciousness. And often they do have honed like capacities for going into non-ordinary states,
Mm.
whether that is through the use of substances, but also I always think of shamans as not necessarily requiring substances to go into non-ordinary states. So they have particularly intuitive qualities. Often shamans in some of the traditions are is like something that they're raised to be, like they have more attunement to ancestral connections
Mhm.
and also uh, attuned often to not only non-ordinary states, but wider realms, but also the natural world. You know, like I could even maybe say, for example, witches, in another time would have possibly been classified as shamans. So anyway, things along those lines.
Mhm. Yeah, good. Thank you, Linda. So good. You're triggering both of you are so far have triggered lots of things for me. So I'm excited about this conversation. Dave, please go ahead.
I would concur with my friends here that a lot of those ideas come up for me too. But I was trying to think of the thing that bugs me about it. Not that I need one, but rather my concern is that shamans are brilliant, can see and hear things that most people don't, but that the world isn't ready to hear it. And therefore, their utility in day to day is really low. Just thinking of the kinds of conversations we have in the media today, you put a shaman into that mix, and nobody will connect with, well, it will bounce off 99% of the people who are participating in, let's call it the public dialogue, making the shaman sort of impotent in a way. And I find that kind of frustrating, but I don't know, maybe inevitable or it's imposed on us whether we like it or not.
Mhm.
I'll leave it at that.
Okay, thanks for adding that tension. Tension can be good. It's a source of creativity, so appreciate that. Lina.
When I think about a shaman, I think about someone who can communicate with physical and spiritual, can be in the middle of both worlds, translator, seer. And then when I think about the term shaman, my understanding is that it's a term used broadly and borrowed from Siberia, the original place of shamanism. So it's interesting to think is like, what do we mean by shaman? Are those that were shamans from Siberia or shamans in a broader way? It's a question internally.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know much about the Siberian tradition, although I did go on a tour once. Where was this? Was I in Hungary or Austria? Anyway, we did part of the tour was we got to go hang out with this mountain shaman who used kind of this sort of this drumming technique, which I think was the common technique for Siberian shamans to enter these altered states, is that they would drum this kind of rhythmic, monotonous drumming for hours and hours and hours, and that was one of their main tools. Yeah. Okay, Ella.
Hey, good morning.
Mm,
Thank you for this conversation, Justin. For me, I think there's many different ways to communicate in different ways, if you know what I mean. Like, so shamanism isn't for me like one higher level of consciousness necessarily. It might be a lower level too, right? There's so many different aspects to this word that really we don't have words for them.
mm,
Or maybe we do and I don't know them.
mm,
So it's like what is a metaverse, right? Like people that can travel to metaverses, who is grounded to Mother Earth and can feel that energy wave? Who feels like when you stand on a mountain, you're connected to the universe? It's all those subtle different ways that we are communicated with. And it's like distinguishing them and working with how to better be able to listen because really we have to be able to hear the communication from all the different modes that the word shamanism brings forth, right? So thanks.
Yeah, cool. Like different flavors, different different flavors of access to different worlds. And because maybe there's so many different worlds, some people might be more skilled in spanning the boundary between one particular world, or with one particular type of other non-human intelligence or something like that. It reminds me of, like, in the non-duality, especially in contemporary dialogues about non-duality, because all the different traditions, we're at this place now in the world where we can talk about everything all at once, and everyone wants to be part of the conversation, and we can access all this information. So there is a conversation about, like, oh, different traditions and different practices around the world, whether it's like Kashmir Shaivism or the Balls of Bengal, or like Orthodox Eastern Christianity, or like ancient Greek philosophy, or Vajrayana Buddhism or Zen Buddhism. They all kind of lead to these, like, if you take the practice all the way to the end, there is like enlightenment at each one. There's like a waking up experience, but it has like its own unique flavor. Each one of them has their own unique flavor, and they tend to express themselves. The person they bounce through life maybe, but they bounce through life like slightly differently depending on which tradition they followed. And so I find that quite interesting, and I think there's lots we could explore there from the shamanic angle as well. So what do I want to say? I want to say a few things about, like, just I wrote down some notes, so I might glance down a bit, but I just want to say, like, some things I was thinking about, like what a shaman is, and this has been written about a lot. But what is this type? If we are going to take the case that there's like a shamanoid type, what is the type? And one of the things is they're kind of visionary. They have an insight. They have a capacity to not just see the world as it is, but to see what could be, or to see, possibilities. That's one of the sort of characteristics that's been identified as common. A lot of people mention in some way or another, they're boundary spanners. They are able to go into different realms or communicate. They often, like in kind of indigenous cultures, they are boundary dwellers. They live way out at the edge of the village or the territory, and they're the people, if another tribe comes that speaks a different language, they're the ones that can begin to, like, communicate, foster a relationship between the boundaries. They span boundaries, and they cross boundaries, like gender. They might be like cross dressers, or they might dress up like animals, or they don't like have a lot of I guess respect. I don't know if that's the right word, but they don't have like a lot of, they're not really constrained very much by social roles and gender roles and things like that. And so because they can kind of see through culture, they see it as a construction, they see it for what it is. And because they can do that, they have this immense capacity to create culture and create rituals and create meaning and help the group come together to define what it means and what its meaning is in this moment and in this world. That's one of the great gifts and powers that shamanoid people do have. And I think Dave's comment about them being misunderstood and outcast and unwelcome is historically true. And that gift is important. And we could say maybe it's much needed in this world right now. They are pattern recognizers. They tend to, someone was talking about nature, maybe Ella was, I can't remember, a bunch of people were, but like they do connect in with nature, and they have kind of like an ecological consciousness, and they are able to see how everything is connected, and it's all kind of comes together in this holistic unity. And they are astonishing. They do really weird things, when they need to go cure an illness, or or oftentimes they're the ones who they die. I mean, metaphorically, but also in some ways figuratively, they are the ones who fall apart and go crazy, but they come back from it, reunited, reintegrated in a new form of wholeness. And that's why they make such great healers, is because if you think you're losing your mind in society, the best thing you can do, or in the tribe or wherever, is to go find someone who's already done that and come back from it, and that they're whole and healed now. They're going to be that's the person who can help you. And that's often the shaman. They're artists, they're storytellers, they're the ones who gather, convene people together and create stories, and help people imagine what the future could be, especially when there's a lot of uncertainty. If everything's certain and everything's going, just looks like it's going to be the same tomorrow as it was yesterday, shamans might not be needed as much. But when uncertainty gets very high, that's when there's an impulse to like help, how do we imagine what's next? And that's a role that shamans can play. So in today's world, I mean, I'm not saying that every person who's a therapist is a shaman. I would definitely not say that at all. But the kind of roles that maybe make sense for someone with some of those capabilities, a healer, a boundary spanner, a translator, someone who's deeply attuned to other beings and attuned to life, and, in touch with the mystery. It could be like a therapist, it could be a coach, could be an artist, a musician, a writer, it's spiritual teacher. Like those are all kinds of roles that a shamanoid person might be more comfortable taking on in contemporary society. And one other thing about shamans, traditionally, and maybe I've said this in a different way, but they're recognized as being wild, in a sense of, because they're not so constrained by social convention and roles. They see through culture, they see it for what it is, and they're in touch with nature. It's like it's harder to tame them, maybe with the weight of modern culture and society. Some shamans do feel themselves, being tamed a bit, but there's something in them, these shamanoid types of people, that they're wild, they will not be tamed. So those are some reflections. Any thoughts about that? Any disagreements? Anything you want to expand on? Yes, Ella.
So I was talking to a friend who yesterday, who I would say is a shamanoid as well, has visions, and has like higher purpose. And the conversation went to feeling that we have now, that it's like, okay, we're being called forth. It's like there's a calling now that, and Dave, you feel like it's too soon, or it's not in the listening, but I feel like it's starting to emerge, much like a seed that just has a crack in it and you don't know what's going to come forth. But I feel like there is a calling now starting to happen amongst people who listen and feel differently and can feel different wavelengths that others can't.
Yeah, I think Alexander Bard, I once said, something to the effect, and I think I've heard laymen say something like this too, that when things get really weird, the shamans become the shamanoids, actually, even though they're normally the outcasts, that they become the leaders because they're at the edge, and the edge can be a really risky place to be, especially if you're at the edge that's not the leading edge. You might get lost in the fray, but if you're willing to go to the edge, you have at least the possibility of contributing something really important and meaningful in a time of change. Yeah, thanks, Ella. Yeah, Mel. You didn't want to talk? I thought you raised your hand.
I was waving at my husband, sorry.
Okay. No. Hi, Mel's husband. All right. Okay, Logan.
Yeah, I was just thinking.
It's hard to hear you. I think your microphone setting might be muffled or something.
That any better?
Way better.
Okay. I was just thinking about the shamanoid type, as like maybe a separate type of human, but I was also thinking of it as a type, as like an archetype, and that it seems to me that, like any archetype, it's something that all of us carry in each other, and that in many traditions we might categorize as shamanic. And you pointed to this, there's like someone who's gone before calling forth that pattern or capacity, as opposed to the modern Western view of going to an expert to get something that only they have. There's something in the shamanic relationship of going to this person who's gone before, who calls forth what we need in ourselves. And there's something in that I think is really powerful and beautiful.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm curious, because I'm sure that the people that are attracted to get up at 8 a.m. on Thursday and turn on their Zoom for an hour to be part of this discussion is a unique subset of the population. So how many of you feel like, you've had some of these experiences, or like this is like, you would, if you had to self-classify, you'd probably be like, yeah, I'm a shamanoid. How many of you have that experience? Yeah. Yeah, a couple of you. Okay. Yeah, like maybe most of you. Okay, good. So, okay. Well, I think we talked a bit about like why a shamanoid type of person might be relevant for today's moment. But I guess I could say like a little bit more of that. Um, if you have a mental health crisis, and so there's a mental health crisis, there's a time when technology is proliferating so rapidly and, catapulting us into an uncharted, unrecognizable, incomprehensible world. There is, a profound identity crisis at the species level, a lack of meaning, a lack of ability for people to have a common meaning of what it means to be a human being. Those are the types of and there's also the other role that the shaman often would serve in the tribe is when like a couple was like, or any relationship in the tribe was broken and people couldn't talk to each other and they couldn't get along. They would go to the shaman to help them. Maybe they would take some medicine or something. I don't know what the shaman would do. The shaman might do it, him or herself might go to a different realm or, work on something at a very subtle level, but he would help to heal that relationship. And a lot of those issues seem to be like issues that we're facing in the world today. And so you could make the case that if you do have shamanoid capacities, the um, that maybe if you want to make it, like if you see yourself as part of the human species and you feel on some level that you'd like to contribute to it, maybe the thing to do now is not to repress those capacities, but to cultivate them, to develop them, and to give your gift. What do you hear in that? Any reflections? Dave.
Oh, I hate to say this because I feel like I'm being a downer for the room.
All right, every room needs a downer. We need a bring your buzzkill energy to us,
It's
Dave. We want it.
not really my style, but I think I'm really feeling what's happening in the world. Um, and probably, in a manner that just isn't healthy or is arguably dysfunctional. But I feel hopelessness around it. Like the shaman's going to get booted out of any room because nobody has time for this crazy person who's a babbling idiot. Even though, well, those of us who are here would think vastly differently, but I maybe I'm watching too much news. I don't watch that much, but anytime I do, I feel like the shaman's going to get a boot in the ass or a punch in the gut. Sorry to be so negative, but I don't know. I hope somebody has something that would sort of counter that over and out.
Yeah, well, okay, Linda.
Well, I've got, as you were reading your description, or talking about what is actually a shamanoid type, I was thinking, oh my goodness, amongst people I'm familiar with, particularly in the medicine world, there's a lot of shamanoid types that are coming to the surface. Like my sense is there is we're not at a critical mass, but it's phenomenal, like a mycelium of, you know, of these shamanoid types that may not identify under that category. But, just to speak to what Dave is saying, yes. I mean, if we're out there going, I'm a shaman, that's not the way. But what it speaks to me is that like there's a consciousness and it may have to go consciously underground and stay underground, but that's how cultures have survived over the centuries, is to read the field in a sense. And it may be that if we're really serious about all this, that there's nurture the underground for the times that are coming. I don't know. There's some thoughts in there, but in my experience, there's never been so many people that are actually maybe not totally aware, but are cultivating these capacities. Yeah. It's like that's rising as much as the other insanity is rising. There's just different flavors of what we call insanity.
Thank you. Logan.
Yeah, Linda, what you were saying in response to Dave was just bringing up a lot about my own journey these last few years, and one of the metaphors that has sustained me is this idea of like when you feel yourself like in the dark and under immense pressure, you could take the case that you've been planted and like a seed, and there is bringing this other possible dimension doesn't just mean multi-dimensional spiritual realities. It could even be like another possible dimension coming from the wild nature is to say, first we root. And so, what you were talking about with mycelial networks and these other views, and Dave, this is just my offering to you, because I spent more years than I'd like to admit, and the hopelessness is like, okay, what I can do is root. And the deeper I root, then the stronger my sprouting will be. And does the flower know the day that it breaks forth from the ground?
Um, I was listening to an audiobook. I don't know the name of it, who the author was, something about shamanism, maybe about 4 or 5 months ago. And it was practices to develop shamanic capacities. One of the first ones in the book was about rooting into the earth. And, um, you know, she was giving she was recall, or I don't know what she was telling a story that, as some indigenous person from maybe South America had come to meet a lot of North American, Western type minded people. And they said like, oh, like all these people, like I can see their energy. They don't have a root. Like a human, it's like a carrot. All humans are supposed to be carrots with this big energy field that goes deep into the earth, that grounds them, that centers them, that gives them strength. But everyone in the West is just like the carrot's cut. There's just the top growing out of the ground. There's no carrot below. And so they don't have a root. And so the practice was to actually connect into the earth and visualize your energy field going down into the earth. Now, Dave, that might be just an example of this kind of batshit crazy sort of element of like, this sort of thing that gets cast out of the boardroom and cast out of Davos, but it would be a practice to ground and strengthen and energize.
I like the metaphor, the analog of the carrot.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there's a lot of greenery above the ground and very little root.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I don't know, Logan, I would love to hear how you see rooting. How does one root oneself? I know it's a big question, but how do you think of it?
Well, in my experience, that's really all I can share from it. And my experience has been um, one of searching, and like when I look back, say over the last 7 years, where I've been searching and reaching to has always been to these deeper sources. So for me, part of the arc of my life story has been in and out of what we might call the Christian tradition or Christian conversation. And so for me, it's been, the Dead Sea Scrolls and the Copper Scrolls and the Nag Hammadi texts and what, like, what's the stuff that's been intentionally buried? Like what deeper wisdom was there that was threatening? And and I I have some intrinsic sense that I've always had that's what's truly powerful at the individual level is threatening to the convention, right? And so I have an attraction to that. And so as I followed that in retrospect, I can see how that's taken me deeper and deeper and deeper. But I reached the point for myself that the the mental or cognitive search wasn't enough. And so then, starting to recognize all of these reminders that have been showing up in life is, I have a body. How do I embody that? How do I actually work with this physical container to deepen its capacities? And so it's been, I guess I might say, intuitive. Sometimes it's felt very happenstance or random. Um, but it's only after the fact that I can see that perhaps that's what I've been doing.
Yeah, very pertinent to our next discussion. And one of the metaphors that just pops up around the world in various places, slightly different expressions of it, but it's everywhere in mystical traditions and non-dual traditions and indigenous traditions throughout the world, is that we do have bodies, and we also have multiple layers and dimensions of our bodies, ranging from very, very concrete and gross, which is what everyone in the Western world thinks of as the body, but getting subtler and subtler and subtler. We have these subtle energetic bodies that, even like, I guess there's some like Western science around this, with the heart has this electromagnetic field that goes for feet, and sometimes, many, many feet beyond the body. It can affect reality. And so we do have these subtle energetic bodies, and in some traditions, let's see, here's one, this awakening through. So in some traditions, there's like 9 bodies, and in some traditions there's 3, and in some there's 14. But we've got these different layers of bodies, and each one, sometimes there's whole maps that people have explored and mapped out. When you're in the astral body, you can travel this far from your physical body, and then when you're in the etheric body, here's where you can go, and here's the places you can see. So it's quite elaborate, all these maps of reality, and what you can do. Like, so I think embodying power and being able to use, like, what Aleister Crowley, I think, defines as magic is like, what is it? Using the will to change desire into reality, or something like that anyway. So being able to actually have a transformative effect on the world maybe just doesn't come from, the use of the concrete, gross, the limited frame that we have on the body that we kind of grew up with. I think there's a lot to be said about that. One of my mentors who helped me, I did a master's thesis in leadership, and her field was climate change, and she talked about how, there's like the concrete things that you can do. You put emissions filters on factories, and you plant trees in different places, but there's also the subtler and more even causal things that you can shift, which in a sense, it doesn't seem as powerful because it's not immediate, but it actually has more effect in the long term. It can be more powerful. So I did want to talk a little bit about, like, what are some capacities of shamanoids, and of course there's all kinds, so being really in touch with subtle bodies and able to manipulate one's own subtle body, and also influence others' subtle bodies is probably one of the capacities. I'm just going to list a few off here in no particular order, but like being able to intentionally enter a flow state, or being able to be in a room and transmit so that everyone in the room is suddenly in a flow state. That's a pretty cool capacity to have, right? The ability to kind of stand outside of time, or bend time, or compress time, or those working with time, and that time is not actually what we think it is. That's one. Like accessing intuition. I think parts work and internal family systems work is kind of a shamanic expression, being able to like integrate all these different parts of myself and have them working together and supporting each other. Even though there might be parts that I thought I was going to make those parts outcast, I found a way to like integrate them all into the picture, and then do that at the level of a community. There's an integrating impulse that I think is an expression of shamanic capacity or power. deep, deep, deep presence. I think also like there's a type of person that when they walk into the room, they don't need to say anything, but they're felt and they influence everything that happens around them changes when as soon as they walk into the room. And so I think that's a power I've witnessed. Um, there's something about being able to say language that carries meaning and force with it that's beyond just the words. Cast spells, like it's kind of what I'm talking about there. So those would be some. And then if anyone has read the Yoga Sutras, I don't know if you have, it's short, but there's 4 chapters or books in the Yoga Sutras, and the third one is all about what is called siddhis, which would be like capacities that highly developed yogis uh, tend to they get some of these capacities. And actually the book is quite detailed. It's like, oh, because you have to, the way that the book says is like the way you get these capacities or the way they develop and show up stronger is if you engage in these deep states of concentration, which I guess would be another shamanic practice. But it's kind of cool because it's like, oh, if you concentrate on this, you'll develop this capacity. But if you concentrate on this particular thing, you can develop this capacity. And there's a whole list of them. I wrote a bunch of them down this morning, but they're the types of things like knowledge of the past and future, knowledge of previous births, being able to read others' karma and their past lives, perception beyond the mind, like being able to understand what the deep causes are that influence the mind, being able to become invisible, like there's kind of like psychokinesis, the ability to affect physical matter and reality, being able to flash through the sky or fly. There's some of them are a telepathy, like just being able to send thoughts to others, being able to receive thoughts to others. These are things that in the yogic tradition were just taken for granted a lot of the time. Oh, and like probably I think the most important siddhi of all is freedom from all desire, including the desire for any of these powers. That there's like when a person just is kind of free, they might have desires, but they're not driven by them. And maybe their desires, maybe they don't really have much desire. That's a siddhi, that's a power that I think what was it called? It's called like I can't remember the word for it, but it's called like the most important siddhi, the master siddhi is being free from desire. And so yeah, those are some of the capacities. I'll take reflections. I want to hear what you have to say. Oh, and I want to share one little story first, which is the first time I ever experienced any of these capacities, right? My grandfather knew how to douse, I don't know, or like well witch, I guess they called it, where he could take a willow branch or like a metal rod and he would walk around and he would find where there was water underneath the earth because the energy would bend the branch or the rod would tip. And so he taught me how to do that. And it was before I was young, I hadn't seen Star Wars. I might have read a couple of comic books, but I didn't know anything about like the force or powers or anything like that. I was just following the instructions that my grandpa was giving me and just like hold the rod really loosely and it will just tip on its own and just feel when it's tipping and just like something will pull it. It won't be you. Just give control away. So I did that and I found exactly where the water was. And, that was my first experience. And then later I was reading, because I got really interested in this stuff. So I was reading all about like psi and everything and all the scientific criticisms. And I realized, oh, it wasn't actually that I knew where the water was. It was that people around me knew where it was. And even though they weren't in the yard when I was doing it, like I was picking up subtle cues from them and my subconscious little micromuscular movements was like forcing the rod to tip, even though it had nothing to do with psi or power or subtle energy or anything like that. It was just all my subconscious mind was tricking me into thinking that it was actually something, but it wasn't. And, that's kind of how the world that we grew up in, that there's no space for this. It's taboo. We don't it's not real. So that's what I learned to think. And same thing with a little, I remember once when I was a kid, I did a little experiment with a friend, where you would, like the psychic experiment where there was cards, one was a star and one was a wavy symbol. And I think there's 5 or 6 of them. So we drew them all out and we were trying to send each other messages, and like it was off the charts. I think we were getting it right about like 50% of the time or something. But then I read about it and I realized, oh, it's just all these, we're just subconsciously, we can tell from the way the paper feels, we remember that that was a wave paper or something. And so none of it's real. And so anyway, I wanted to share a couple of experiences I had when I was a kid, but let me take reflections. Tell me your experiences, or tell me what's there for you. What are you imagining? How are you relating to all of this? Yeah, no.
Hi, thanks. I'm relating to all of it because I'm so into all of this. So it's so fun to talk about it with other people. You were talking about that book about the 9 levels of consciousness or bodies.
This one here, Awakening
Yeah.
to the 9 Bodies. Yeah.
So interestingly enough, I follow a channeler. His name is Daryl Anka,
Okay.
and he channels a being called Bashar, who is an ET actually, in the Sedona area. And he talks about the 9 levels of consciousness as well. So as soon as you said the 9 bodies, and he was talking about the 9 levels, I'll email it to you because I downloaded it from his website and just for fun to see if they're very similar or not.
Cool. I'd love that.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's my reflection.
It'd be neat to have like a WhatsApp group or something for us over the 9 weeks so that we could all talk to each other between sessions. If people are open to that, I don't know, send me an email and I'll see if I start one up or something. I don't know. Okay, anyone else? Okay. Well, I want to say one other thing about the cities and kind of so there's a guy named Dean Radin. He's a scientist that works out of the Institute for something something. It's called IONS, and I've actually been to their campus in near Sedona, California. But anyway, Institute of Noetic Science, I think is where he's the title of, or the head scientist. And so he's done a lot of experiments on like one of the cool ones I think is really interesting, and you can find YouTube videos on this, is they got meditators to focus and see if they could influence the outcome of a split gate experiment, like the quantum experiment where you send the photon through the split gate, and to try to focus on the photon going through one of the gates instead of the others. Hey, Cindy, got your note. Sorry you're not on camera. I'm a seed in the earth. She's a seed in the earth and she's on fire and she's loving it. Okay, thanks. And they found, yes, there's a small effect, but the odds against chance, the statistical odds that nothing's happening there, that it's just chance, is something like 13 trillion to 1 or something like that. And he's also done experiments on telepathy, and in this book where he outlines all the cities, he talks about all the science that they've done, and he seems to like, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure other scientists would hear this and they would just say, oh, well, he's using the wrong methods, or like, like there's like no space to even hear the possibility of it. But the experiments that he seems to be conducting and meta studies of other experiments, it just shows like mathematically, statistically, yes, telepathy is real. It's in most cases, unless you're a super advanced meditator, his finding was it's a very small effect. It's just a little bit of telepathy, but the chances of it just being by chance is like millions to 1. So there's something going on there. And then in more advanced meditators, sometimes it's not a small effect at all. Sometimes it's a big effect of telepathy. But those you can't use the same math for the statistical odds because there's such a small sample size of those. So it's very interesting, and the name of that book is called Supernormal by Dean Radin, but you can find lots of really interesting YouTube videos where he talks about all the science and all the measures that they put in place to make sure that the experiments have validity. It's quite interesting. Well, we have just a few minutes left, so let's move on to talking about practices, which is kind of where I want to get to for the 9 weeks. Like, I want this to be experiential and experimental with everyone who shows up, and maybe there'll be others that come for some of the sessions, and we'll see how it goes. But I'd like us to like actually engage in practices. One of the practices that I've recently picked up, and I don't know, it's ever since I started it, I'm like, why haven't I been doing this my whole life? Because I love this practice and it seems to make a difference for me, is praying over my food before I eat. And so I do have this little prayer that I say, like, every time I eat now. It's a discipline. And I just say, like, I just give thanks. I say, like, thank you to the sun, thank you to the water, thank you to the earth, thank you to the wind, thank you to all the living beings who had any role in bringing this food to me, including the cow and the plants. Like, thank you so much, and then I say something like to God, however I understand God, which I don't, but I just say anyway, like, God, please bless this food. May it strengthen the best parts of me. May it strengthen my courage, my love, my wisdom, my intelligence, my passion. May it guide me. May it go anywhere in my body that needs to be healed and heal it right now. And may it help me to follow my purpose for my life. May it help me to follow your path for my life. And then, amen. And then I eat. And I don't know, the food seems to taste better. There's something really powerful about doing that. So that's one practice I've been doing. But also, like, in the Yoga Sutras, like, there is like a clear connection between entering into samadhis, or like deep states of concentration. Practicing meditation seems to help you develop the siddhis. So that's maybe, and I mean, in shamanic traditions, it's often like the concentration comes from like going into a trance state with drumming, or I think focusing on nature, like, those are types of practices. I guess psychedelics is another ritual or practice. Oh yeah, shamanic people like create rituals. So, maybe create, what could you create for yourself? But like, one thing that I feel, I don't know, it just feels like I'm feeling like I want to say this because it just came up today, is maybe for this week, if you're open to it, take on the practice of rooting into the earth and visualizing and sensing into, as much as you can, that your energy field goes deep into the earth. The earth is very inviting. The earth has got you. She's powerful. She's got you. So that could be a practice that we could try. So what do you see? Who's willing to take it on? What are you gonna do this week? And what do you have to say? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Mel, I saw your hand, and Linda. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have the exact same practice that you do for blessing food.
Mhm.
And like, I even bless the truck driver in the store and the people who made it for me. So acknowledge, appreciate, and allow, like the 3 A's I'm trying to live by.
Mhm.
And another thing I do is I'm understanding how water is such a conductor of energy that before I drink it, I pour energy into it, like health, wisdom, abundance, peace, those types of things, as I'm drinking it. So I have a couple of those practices as well.
Cool. Thank you. Yeah. Ella?
Yeah, so for me, my practices this time of the year are it's spring, so I am planting seeds everywhere, like all kinds of them. So this is one of the ways that I am connected. And when you talk about being connected to Mother Earth, practice I have, and I've trained people in this for a lot of years, take your shoes off, put your feet in the dirt, like bare feet in the dirt, put your hand on your heart and listen with your heart. What does the earth speak to you? So not with your ears, but with your heart, like listen at that level. And that's really cool to do this time of the year as well.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, Linda, I know you raised your hand. Did you have something you wanted to share?
No, I just was putting up my hand because I thought it's great to have a commitment to, instead of a whole bunch of stuff that gets very forget about, but just one core commitment. And I like the idea of the earth.
Yeah.
And I also appreciate the water blessing because I think that's really helpful. So
Cool. Okay, well, over the 9 weeks, maybe maybe everyone here will invent like a specific practice or something that, enables them to develop these capacities. And I think that's going to be part of the game. And we're going to hear from lots of people and learn so much. So I think it's going to be a great series. Thank you for coming today. I love you all and have a great week. Bye, everyone.